I would imagine it has to do with their background, maybe coming from an abusive environment growing up.
Somebody experiencing abuse as a child or experiencing that kind of relationship and not knowing another kind of relationship necessarily.
If a child or a lady or a man was in an abusive childhood growing up, then they're going to be attracted to an abusive relationship.
There's a point at which some people are either strong enough to stop that pattern and other people are not.
It's a repeat situation of where what you grew up to accept, and then it's replayed when you get married.
So abusive situations in the home must have a pretty profound impact on the children that witness the abuse. What are some common things that you see that children have witnessed abuse kind of go through?
Well, there are a lot of effects. Frequently, they're the bullies on the playground. They have problems making friends. They have low self-esteem. They blame themselves incredibly for the domestic violence that's gone on and think that maybe if they could have done something different, it wouldn't have happened. It's a challenge for them.
My son started exhibiting angry tendencies towards me, towards anybody that was around.
Are these children more likely, do you think, to end up in abusive relationships of their own, or maybe accept abuse as kind of a normal thing in a relationship?
Well, the data shows that overwhelmingly there is a generational cycle of abuse. And as uncomfortable as it is, what we experience in the home is what we think is the model for how families should be when we go into our own marriages and relationships. So, but there are children that don't repeat these patterns, but frequently the children who are raised in violent homes have dysfunctional relationships throughout the rest of their life.
She can't live like this. She has to have a different example. This is not an example of a healthy marriage, a healthy father, a healthy relationship.
What are some ways that this generational cycle can be broken?
Well, a huge one would be to stop abuse in a generation so it would not continue. I think when children who are raised in violent homes receive support services and information about abuse and are counseled for a while, they don't repeat the patterns, and they learn that how destructive the patterns are. So intervening with the kids is a really wonderful way to break the cycle.
I know that he grew up in a very violent home. His father was very abusive to his mother and would put her, in bed for weeks on end because of injuries.
It's not a part of your job being a spouse in an intimate relationship to accept whatever abuse your partner might decide is appropriate. It's not acceptable. Society cannot and will not tolerate it, and we need to make sure we have the resources in the community necessary to support people and to educate people so we can stop that cycle of violence.
It impacts children to a very high degree, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they will then become abusers if they don't have access to those services, because at some point I think everybody becomes accountable for their behavior.
These kids will grow up then to be parents themselves. These kids are your kids' classmates. These are the kids on your kids' soccer team, and maybe you don't feel personally affected by domestic violence. You just don't know it. You are, you just maybe don't know it. Statistically, they say you're at more risk to be in an unhealthy relationship, whether that means you become the abuser or you become the victim. Let's invest in them early and, get as many of these kids out of these situations as early as we can, when we can do the most good and break that cycle.
If you could keep every child from growing up to be a batterer, by definition, within one generation, you would have no more domestic violence. And so reaching the kids is absolutely key.
The impact of an abusive moment is greater on the child that witnesses the abuse than it is on the adult victim of the abuse.
I can look at my children and I protected them a lot, but they were impacted.
they were impacted terribly.
They're watching a parent, a power figure, someone they look up and trust and respect, perhaps, committing acts of violence against another loved one. Internalizing that can be incredibly difficult and incredibly damaging for children.
He punched me in the mouth. That was his favorite thing to do. And so he punched me in the mouth, and I fell. So when I fell half of my body in the kitchen and my head in the hallway. And my daughter was crawling from her bedroom. I fall, and there's blood on my nose and stuff. And I'm laying there, and she goes, and her eyes are just huge. It was like she was in shock. She just sit there and looked at me. And I felt so humiliated at that time because he was doing it in front of her. The way she dealt with it is when the fights were happening, she would lay down and go to sleep. There could be just a brawl, hitting and throwing against the wall. She would lay down in the middle of the process and go to sleep. And that made me feel so guilty. I just taught her about domestic violence. I taught her about what it looked like and what a healthy relationship, and that this was not a healthy relationship.
This is a men's issue, not a women's issue. That's men who cause 95 to 99% of the domestic violence, and they need to take ownership of it as men, dealing with other men as well as with the women in their lives. So, yes, it's important for my daughters, but it may be even more important for me to be involved in this issue because I have 2 boys.
So in my sister's situation, my sister's daughter witnessed her own mother being shot and killed, and then saw her father kill himself. How do you think that's going to affect her as she gets older and starts to form her own personal relationships?
Oh, that's a really difficult question, and unfortunately there's not a straightforward answer. I'm remembering that your mother and your stepfather have custody of your niece, is that correct?
They actually adopted her, so they're her adopted parents.
They're her adopted parents. Yeah. Since they have had contact with your niece's counselors and have been aware of the counseling that she's received, maybe you could go talk with them about what they think the effect has been.
Lee was right. I needed to talk to my parents about this one. There was, in fact, a lot of things I needed to talk to them about regarding my sister's death. It happened almost 7 years ago, and we have never talked about it in detail. It was time for this to change. So I packed up my car and began the long drive from Seattle to Southern California. So here I am in Oregon. It's about 5 in the morning. I'm in Utah. I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm in Fillmore, Utah. So here I am in Zion National Park. Flying would have been a lot easier, but there's something about a road trip that always helps me clear my head and think. I knew it would be difficult to talk to my parents about my sister's death, so having time to think was a very good thing.
It seems casual to say it, but it just never occurred to me that what the outcome that took place would happen. It never occurred to me. If it would have, I would have done something different.
How do you explain to a 2-year-old, Mommy and Daddy are gone, and they're not coming back? As a child who's never even had a pet die, at 2.5, she didn't have a clue on what death meant.
Did see her mother murdered, and she does have remembrances of it.
She described what happened very accurately.
She's going to be questioning her whole life. What happened? What happened? Why don't I have a mother and father? Why did my father kill my mother? Why did he commit suicide? Why did they do that? Was I to blame in any way?
It's the nature versus nurture whole controversy that goes on forever. So if we just look for a moment of how she's being raised from a very young age in a 2-parent, very stable home, the psychologist feels that she's off on the right start. So I have talked in great detail with the psychologist about this. And she said the tendencies will be there. Being an involved mom makes a big difference to the child. It makes a huge difference to her sense of identity and security and all of that kind of thing. So hopefully we're giving her tools to handle whatever life throws at her later, and security and stability and all that kind of stuff. We're doing everything we can, and take it as it comes. She's got terrific people around her. She's got a lot of loving family, close friends, a lot of support. She'll be okay.